I don't think any of you were here 2 weeks ago. I told about all the presidents that had been here. We have had 6 presidents in the U.S. presidents in Catalina. And then, of course, we also had someone you might recognize his name, Winston Churchill. He came here in 1929. He was the Undersecretary of the Navy at the time. He came here specifically just to catch a swordfish. And with his luck, typical Winston Churchill, within 20 minutes, he only went 1 mile out. He was at the tuna club. He went 1 mile out. Within 20 minutes, he caught a 180-pound swordfish. And he came back. He thought, boy, this is nothing. You just go out and, troll. So he came back to the bar that they used to have in the tuna club. And he said to the members, he said, boy, this is really nice. Anytime you want to, you just have to go out and catch the swordfish. Well, luckily the press was covering this, because if they hadn't, the members of the club probably would have killed him, because most of them had been waiting their whole life to catch their first swordfish and never did, and he did it on his very first try in 20 minutes. So that's just typical Winston Churchill kind of thing. Now, the problem I'm going to have, but I think I'll do okay with this group, no disrespect. Some of the celebrities we have had here kind of go back a ways. One we can talk about is Taylor Swift. I think that one everybody knows contemporarily. By the way, her favorite ice cream place is Lloyd's. So if you ever want to see Taylor Swift, you can. If she's
When
here,
was she here?
she'll be hanging out.
When was she here?
Huh?
When was Taylor Swift here?
She's been here a couple of times. Oh yeah, she's been here a couple of times. People have seen her, but she tries to keep a very low profile. Also, you probably remember a woman by the last name of Smith. She married, I have it here in my notes. She married, Kate Smith. Of course, you remember her, that introduced God Bless America. During World War II, the island was shut off to the mainland because the Japanese were planning to take over the island, use as a military base to destroy the oil refineries. So they had a lot of reservists who were here being prepared to go out and do whatever they had to do, or just protect the island. So Kate Smith would come over, and I can't even imagine what it must have felt like for them to be in the audience in the theater, have Kate Smith on the stage singing God Bless America with her voice. I mean, she wasn't a singer, she was a belter. I mean, her singing God Bless America. And then I remember I said this one time, I turned on my internet and they had her on a stage for military men. It wasn't in Catalina, doing exactly what I talked about. So I know how it must have been like to. So there are a lot of celebrities. I'll just run down the names: Orson Welles, Henry Fonda, Humphrey Bogart, David Niven, Errol Flynn. I'm skipping over some because I'm going to tell you their personal stories that I was personally connected with. Charlie Chaplin and Paulette Goddard, which I think is a very stupid story, and I'll tell you why. Charlie Chaplin was supposedly, this was back in the 30s, was having supposedly a private affair with Paulette Goddard. So he thought if he came to Catalina, nobody would know about it. This is the worst place in the world to be because of all the movies they were making. There were probably more celebrities at that time in Catalina than there was in Hollywood. So for them to have this clandestine meetings with nobody finding out about it was considered completely ridiculous. Also, Howard Hughes would come here many times, and that's when he was dating Katharine Hepburn. So we've had some pretty good ones here. Laurel and Hardy came here all the time in between each of their movies. Every time they made a movie, in between the movies, they would come to Catalina. Hardy would play golf, Laurel would fish. He had his own fishing boat. Are you ready for this one? Thomas Alva Edison came over with Henry Ford. They used to hang out together. They used to go on trips together. Well, they came to Catalina. Bing Crosby, James Cagney, Benny Goodman, Zane Grey, of course, he had his home up on the hillside. He lived here. Rin Tin Tin, probably the most important. Walter Cronkite. Marilyn Monroe lived here in 1943 when she was 16 years old. If you want to know where she lived, if you go to the community church, just across you'll see the 3-story gray building. It's called the White House Apartments, don't tell me why. On the top story is where she and her husband, James Doherty, her first husband, that's where they lived in 1943. The reason is he was in the Maritime. She had begged him to marry her on her 16th birthday to get away from a bad family situation. He did. He was then stationed here in 1943 because the only people allowed to be on the island during the war were those who lived here on a year-round basis, the Army, the Navy, and the Maritime. So he came over to be in the Maritime. He brought his bride with him, and it turned out obviously to be Norma Jean Baker, Norma Jean Doherty, eventually Marilyn Monroe. Jack London.
Did she actually work at Lloyd's?
No.
That's a myth?
No. There's a rumor that she worked at Lloyd's. So they paid me, Lloyd paid me $250 to verify the story. So I went through every newspaper and talked to people who hung out with her in 1943. They were still her friends that befriended her when she was Norma Jean Baker. She said, no, she did not work. She had no reason to work at Lloyd's. Her husband was he was a projectionist at the theater for the military to give them entertainment. So her friends told me all she did was hung out at the beach. So
she didn't make taffy.
They actually paid me that. Now, right next door, believe it or not, this is where General George Patton lived, right next door to this building, about where the sheriff's department is. Now, I was born in this building. That doesn't make it a celebrity, but I'm just explaining. This used to be the home of Judge Joseph Banning, of the 3 Banning brothers who owned the island before the Wrigleys. So when they left the island in 1919, when Mr. Wrigley took over, in 1923, they turned his home into a hospital. The very first hospital is above the liquor store, Abe's Liquor Store. The Perlis building right next door, the 3-story building. The first hospital was built there in 1914. The top 2 floors was the hospital. Then in 23, they moved it over here. Then in 60, they moved it to where it is now, but between 58 and 60, there was no hospital. So all the kids had to be born on the island over at the clinic, which was over there where you see the HR building for the island company, now over on Metropole. So let's see, Jean Harlow lived here for a while with her mother. Her mother lived up at the Kirk home. Now, if you go up Barilla, and over on the left you'll see a white building. Right in front of you you'll see a pink building, which is the oldest home on the island. Over to the left is the Kirk house. That's where Jean Harlow's mother lived. Now, Jean Harlow, you probably know, they don't know how she died, but they know she died. They came up with all kinds of stuff like gonorrhea, syphilis, trying to, glamorize her death. The people who were here at the time that she died in the 30s said it was very simple. She had extremely white skin. Extremely white skin. She was very rarely out in the sun, as were most people in those days. You just didn't lay in the sun. You always kept yourself covered. She went to, which is now the Descanso Beach Club, where the St. Catherine Hotel was. And she fell asleep on the beach. She started in the shade, just, relaxing. By the time she woke up, the shade had moved. She was now completely burned. Now, you probably know that the skin is your largest organ. It affects every other organ in your body. Now, at this time, doctors didn't realize the significance of sunburn because people just didn't get sunburn. I mean, it just didn't happen. So they really couldn't figure out why did all of her organs all stop pretty much at the same time. It was because she had a very, very bad sunburn. So what they did with her in Hollywood to keep her acting until she died is they would put powder all over her to cover up her sunburn, thinking, it's a sunburn. Well, they didn't know that internally she was dying. Oh, Anna Nicole Smith is the one I was trying to think of. You probably know her about 15 years ago. I saw her over here. She's the one that married that billionaire and ended up not getting much money from him, but she was like 50, 60 years younger. And I saw her here. So people wouldn't recognize her. She got off the boat and she had two friends, one stand in the front of her, one stand in the back of her, and she walked through town in the middle so nobody could, but I mean, of course you could tell who she was. Her friends weren't big enough. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you, I don't know, do you want to, I think we're running out of time.
You actually have about 7 more minutes.
Well, this is going to be hard. Okay, I'm going to start telling you the ones that I had a particular contact with. Okay, the first one was Johnny Weissmuller. If you remember, he was the Tarzan, probably the most famous, the one that... Now, he lived here with his wife, Lupe Valdez, who was an actress. And anyway, in 1937, it was before I was born, but I read in the newspaper, the Wrigley fountain in front of the Wrigley stage, the kids all said they wanted him to get up on the railing and to beat his chest and do his Tarzan. They recognized him. Well, he did, and he turned out to be more human than ape man because he fell off the wall of the fountain. But he didn't fall into the fountain, which was lucky. He fell on the outside, which I think kind of killed the whole thing. The reason I mentioned Johnny Weissmuller, on the island, I was called Nature Boy because I didn't wear any clothes up until the age of 4. Mom would just put baby oil on me, send me wherever to the beach, and I was just the cutest little kid you've ever. That was before the accident. That was before the train wreck. So they used to have the Bobby Jones golf tournaments up at the golf course. The actual Bobby Jones, so he was actually here for his tournaments. All the celebrities showed up, including Johnny Weissmuller. Well, when I was 3, this is 1950, and Johnny Weissmuller was no longer playing Tarzan. And so he was divorced from his wife, Lupe Valdez. So he wanted to pick up on girls. So he went to my mother. My father was 3rd in control of the island company, so he was a very high-ranking member of the community. And of course, my mother, she would work with the Miss America beauty pageant contestants when they came. So basically, Mom did her part as being, the important couple in the family before I was born in this building in 1947. So anyway, it was 1950, and Johnny Weissmuller wanted to pick up on women. So he went over to my mother and he said, "Betty, do you mind if I borrow Nature Boy?" Of course, I had no clothes on. So what he did is he took his shirt off, put me on his shoulders, and started walking through the crowd. Now, he was very tall. I think he was like 6'3" or 6'4", massive shoulders, still the long hair, looking just like Tarzan. So he would walk through the crowd And the women would all look up, see me, the cutest little kid you've ever seen, and said, he looks like the boy in the old Tarzan series. Then they looked a little further down, and they said, my gosh, that's Johnny Weissmuller. So they put me, so as soon as the women got around Johnny Weissmuller, he would put me down and send me back to Mom. So, but he never gave me anything for it. So I was going to write a column for Reader's Digest that says I was a 3-year-old pimp for Tarzan, but I never did. I don't think they would have printed it. But do you remember the name Leo Carrillo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't? I was afraid we're going back a little far. Okay. They actually, his family was very well established in Southern California. They owned a lot of property. There's even a Leo Carrillo Beach, or Cabrillo Beach. Okay, so Leo Carrillo was a silent screen actor, but he was now moving into television. And he had a new TV show that just came out called Cisco and Pancho. Look it up if you don't.
Never heard of it.
Okay, well anyway. So, for some reason, okay, Mom would let me leave home in the, at night. There was no concern. Everybody looked out for everybody else.
Yeah.
So there was no reason why I couldn't at 3 come downtown on my own. We lived up on Descanso behind the Pavilion Hotel, which, by the way, my grandfather built all those homes for Mr. Wrigley in 1920. So anyway, something always told me that I had to be at a certain place. So outside of where the bank is, that's where the Waikiki Hotel and Restaurant was. Okay, so do you remember all this?
Yeah, I know where they were, yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad somebody's
I've got a
verified.
big collection of stuff.
Huh?
I have a large collection of catalogs and stuff.
Oh,
I've talked to you before.
I'd love to
Yeah,
see it.
yeah.
But anyway, so there's a bench out in front of the bank. Well, that was the bench leading into the Waikiki bar, restaurant, the hotel. So something always told me that I needed to be there when I came down. And there was Leo Carrillo sitting there every time I came. So he put out his arms, put me on his lap, and just sort of let me sit there. Well, the women coming in and out of the bar would see this adorable little kid and said, "Is that your grandson?" And he said, "No." And then he'd introduce himself. Their grandmothers probably remembered Leo Carrillo. He told them, "I'm going to be doing a new TV series now called Cisco Kid and Pancho. I'm going to play Pancho." And then he would give me a nickel, put me down, and I'd run over to Lloyd's. At that time they called it Diffin's, because Harry Diffin ran it, even though it was Lloyd's, we all referred to. So I would go, so at least pimping for him, I would at least get an ice cream, even though Johnny Weissmuller gave me absolutely nothing. Mickey Rooney made more movies here on the island. By the way, when I talk about celebrities who have been here, you have to realize there's been over 60 or 600 movies and TV shows made on the island since 1909. So even though I'm not mentioning their names, any of these movies that were made here, like Mutiny on the Bounty, Clark Gable